Definitely. Now, please, Hannu Rajaniemi, who will conclude our seminar, our science cafe. And Hannu, I don't remember your talk.
It's called
long.
It was very long. It is now called The Imaginary and the Real. So in the spirit of the game jam, I cut some features.
So give us a few moments to set up the Hannu's project. I think it's.
If you do that, I can actually already start. Can you all hear me? So basically my talk is sort of you could say a personal reflection on the relationship between imaginary things and real things, and how areas that we consider to be purely the domain of the imagination can actually have a significant impact on the real world. So I say a personal reflection because I'm unlike some people here, I'm not a philosopher, but hopefully you'll find it interesting. So the starting point, of course, was that today and in the last 30 hours, we've sort of tried to use tools that we would traditionally associate with purely imaginary, the frivolous, the entertainment, fun, such as games, to actually tackle some scientific problems. And so there's a number of other areas of imagination that also start out as sort of exploring completely imaginary realms, but somehow end up touching the real world. And besides games, two areas that are very close to me are mathematics and science fiction. So I'm going to explore that a little bit. So hopefully you'll sort of see that all these areas have a few things in common. So they are all about exploration of beautiful patterns for their own sake, just for the sort of fun or attractiveness of those patterns. But they end up having an impact on the real world. And I think now we also have an opportunity to start combining them. And indeed, that may be the only way to make progress in science and generally all the challenges that are facing humanity. So I'll start with science fiction because that's kind of chronologically my life was the first one out of these things I encountered. Well, actually, games probably came even before. But and my first encounter with science fiction was this book. So 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea by Jules Verne, and I can pretty much trace my entire career back to reading that book. So sort of Captain Nemo's journey around the world in this fantastic submarine, exploring infinitely rich living things and undersea worlds. And so I read it when I was about 6 years old, and immediately inspired me to go ahead and sort of build a vehicle of my own. So I designed a spaceship, which you can see here. So a sort of a fusion powered spaceship for a mission to Jupiter, and I sent it to the European Space Agency. And they actually wrote back, saying that very, very kindly that at the time they were not interested in pursuing fusion-powered propulsion, but nevertheless thanked me for my contribution. And this was kind of a topic of some discussion when my previous company ended up doing some work for European Space Agency on rocket propulsion. So that's sort of my personal experience of the power of science fiction to inspire. So it can set people on sort of paths involving real life science and technology, and it has played a tremendous role in doing that. But science fiction also has a huge impact on shaping the direction of science and technology. So not just through inspiration, but actually introducing concepts that then become real. And one of my current sort of obsessions, if you like, is one of the great sort of fathers of modern science fiction, H.G. Wells. So he's the author of The Time Machine, The War of the Worlds, Dr. Moreau's Island, The Invisible Man, who basically invented all the tropes, alien invasions, time machines, all kinds of things that we now take for granted. But he also wrote a book called The World Set Free, which has pretty much been I think, forgotten or is not as well known as his other books. And it was written in 1904, and it concerns a world war fought, I think, 20 years in 1924, so 20 years in the future of his time. And it describes a bomb that is so powerful that it can destroy an entire city, that can fit in a suitcase, that can be dropped from an airplane, and which is powered by radioactive materials. So obviously he predicted the nuclear bomb, and actually found this picture of the first edition, and it's kind of, and I realized that actually the sort of cover, the shape of the cover looks an awful lot like a mushroom cloud, which obviously he did not know. But actually, he didn't just predict the nuclear bomb. About 30 years later, after the book came out, around 1934, a physicist called Leo Szilard read it. And Leo Szilard is now known as the inventor of the chain reaction. So it was really H.G. Wells who set the wheels in motion that sort of led to a very terrible and world-shaking invention. Now there are many other examples of this pattern in the history of science fiction, where it's not so much of a prediction, but actually sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy. And another really interesting one is the mobile phone. So you can kind of see the familiar way Captain Kirk is holding his Star Trek communicator from this Star Trek episode from the 1960s. So it is pretty much so there are designers who looked into the evolution of the shape of the mobile phone. It can really be traced to inspiration from the Star Trek communicator. In fact, before Motorola's famous flip phone came out, they had which so it looks very much like the Star Trek communicator, and it opens exactly the same way. Motorola tried to launch a model that had exactly the same features, except it flipped open the other way. So the other way than the Star Trek communicator, and it was a complete flop. So in some sense, Star Trek had prepared the collective subconscious to accept the idea of a mobile phone that works in a certain way. So and this is sort of the kind of imagery we are constantly absorbing from science fiction movies and books. So the reason I have the word hieroglyphs there is that this is the name coined by science fiction author Neil Stevenson for this phenomenon. So a hieroglyph, what he calls a hieroglyph in science fiction, is an object or a technology, in fictional technology, that is so powerful and so compelling that people sort of go out of the way to then actually try to build it. And Stevenson has actually set out on a mission to deliberately create hieroglyphs. And if we think about the vast diversity and the vast complexity of all the technologies that we use today, and the vast numbers of disciplines that are needed to build them, it may be the only way to actually have a common goal that everybody can aim towards, is to have sort of a fictional representation or a fictional impression of the thing we want to build that is accessible to everybody. And actually, that's something that also that game designers might think about, how can games be used to sort of prototype future technologies. And fiction allows us to kind of do this science fictional prototyping because it has a very, very powerful, deep effect on our brains. So Professor Hammerlein had already explained about the power of and effects of games on the brain. But people have also studied how fiction affects brains. And it seems that when we read about an action or we read about a character, our brains behave exactly as if we were actually carrying out that action. Our brains cannot distinguish fictional people from real people. The same areas of the brain actuate when we think about Sherlock Holmes and when we think about our mom. So actually, fiction is a very powerful brain information interface technology, probably one of the most powerful ones that we have. So we obviously need to use it wisely and create good and positive heroes. Now, The other area I mentioned that I like, and I think many people in this room like as well, is mathematics. And people have also studied the effect of mathematics on human brains, and discovered that beautiful mathematical theorems, or deep mathematical theorems in mathematicians' brains evoke exactly the same effect as looking at a painting. So to mathematicians, mathematics really is beautiful, really in the sort of literal sense of beautiful. Indeed, many mathematicians, especially pure mathematicians who don't seek any kinds of applications for their work, really say that they pursue their work for the sake of beauty, for the sake of constructing beautiful imaginary things. And they really sort of wear it as a badge of honor. And here it is sort of a famous mathematician, D.F. Hardy, a number theorist, actually from around the same period as H.G. Wells, from 1930s, who really sort of rated most highly the areas of mathematics that have no practical applications whatsoever. And he has a wonderful book called A Mathematician's Apology, where he gives two examples of the things he likes the most. And the most useless areas he mentions are relativity and number theory. So relativity, of course, or its consequences in 10 years' time from the writing of that sentence led to the creation of the nuclear bomb. And our entire communication infrastructure today basically is more or less based on applications of number theory. And of course, we were trying to destroy those foundations just this weekend by finding ways to factorize prime numbers. But I won't tell you if the team succeeded or not, because then we would have to do it. Anyway, so in spite of the fact that pure mathematics is created purely for the sake of the aesthetics, the patterns that mathematicians discover somehow mysteriously end up being useful. And this is especially true in physics, where the mathematics powering quantum mechanics was also discovered long before the physics of quantum mechanics was discovered. So Eugene Wigner, a famous quantum physicist, has this term for this: the unreasonable effectiveness of mathematics in the natural sciences. And it really is unreasonable that somehow these abstract constructions that we create end up matching almost perfectly to elements of reality. And this is something we simply do not understand, and why we should be so fortunate. There is an awful lot of speculation of why this might be the case. My favorite one, although not one I necessarily take seriously, is from a cosmologist called Max Tegmark, who actually posits that mathematical existence and physical existence are actually the same thing. So every conceivable mathematical structure out there is actually physically real, and there are special mathematical structures that allow conscious observers to come into being and sort of look around and then see that the reality is mathematical. So it's kind of an anthropic principle, if you like, applied to mathematics. So it's kind of a nice idea, but it is worth noting that every working mathematician I know is a Platonist in some sense. They describe their work as more about discovering things in this sort of abstract realm rather than inventing things. But so the truth of this very, very deep question, I think, remains unanswered. So finally, I come to games. Now, of course, games have been with humanity from the dawn of humanity. But sort of the modern incarnation of games where sort of conflicts and player actions are modeled through some sort of randomized processes, whether those are using dice or simulated computers, can actually also be traced back to H.G. Wells. So around the same time he wrote World Set Free, H.G. Wells designed a game called Little Wars, which involves, it's essentially a very elaborate rule set for toy soldiers, and sort of using dice and various rules to determine who wins in a given conflict. There's a great book called Playing at the World by a guy called Jan Peterson, which is basically a very, very elaborate history of Dungeons and Dragons, which sort of traces the lineage of modern computer games and modern role-playing games all the way back to Little Wars. So that's where it all came from. So H.G. Wells is kind of an interesting person in the sense of joining these two realms together. In fact, war games and modeling conflict using games is something that has had a massive impact on human history. And I think one of the scariest moments when this sort of thinking of human conflicts using games was very prominent was during the Cold War. So the US military enlisted game theorists, so mathematicians who study the theory of games, to model the possibility of nuclear conflict. They actually also created game-like simulations of world politics involving essentially live-action role-playing and things like that. And the conclusion was that the game theorists basically recommended a first strike. That the only way to actually win a nuclear war would be to make the first strike. So the sort of cold mathematics of game theory said that this would be the right thing to do. So I think we are quite fortunate that we didn't go quite that far in sort of pursuing the applications of games and their impact on the real world. Now, however, a lot of these simulations that were created during the Cold War, especially the ones used to model spaceflight, have much friendlier descendants. And I am talking about, of course, Kerbal Space Program, which is my current favorite computer game. So I urge you to try it out. If you haven't played it, it's essentially quite an elaborate spaceflight simulator. So you control these nice little aliens called Kerbals who are trying to get into space. You help them build spacecraft and you plan missions, and it gets really deep into very realistic orbital dynamics and so on. And it gives you a really fantastic appreciation of how complicated it all really is. Here's a cartoon that sort of describes that from cartoonist Randall Munroe from XKCD. He used to actually work for NASA. So here he illustrates what happened to his understanding of orbital mechanics after playing Kerbal Space Program, and I can attest to the truth of this curve. So games definitely have a massive power to educate. So it's one thing to read about orbital mechanics, and it's another thing to actually try to plan a space mission. And so computer games give us a way of experiencing what that actually feels like. Now we've alluded quite a few times to the fact that games could be used to solve scientific problems. Now that may sound like a bit of a trivial thing. So consider the following: Angry Birds, which Professor Hannu mentioned. The total amount of human brain hours spent on Angry Birds, this was actually in 2012, so I'm sure it's much more now, corresponds to the effort needed to produce at least 12 Wikipedias every year. So 12 times the summary of the totality of human knowledge, right? And there are at least 1 billion people in the world who play at least 1 hour of computer games every day. So there is this massive amount of brain power that we can potentially tap using games. So I think there are vast real opportunities in designing games that allow us to tackle problems. Now, finally, I think games also have an inspirational side to them. And my favorite story related to the way games can drive people to sort of meet extreme challenges and solve really, really difficult problems. It's from 2003, so I don't know if anyone here ever played EverQuest. The game jammers will already have heard this story. But, in 2003, EverQuest was the most popular, massively multiplayer online game. So again, direct descendant of Little Wars of H.G. Wells and the role-playing games that came after that, where you sort of create a fantasy character and go around having adventures. And so EverQuest, the world of EverQuest had a creature called the Sleeper. So that's the sort of purple thing in background over there. So it was this dragon-like creature that was designed to be unkillable, or practically unkillable. So not quite theoretically unkillable, but practically unkillable. It had, in the context of the game, it had 400 million hit points. So, which was like orders of magnitude more than any other character in the game. And so what did the players of EverQuest do? They decided to kill it. And so there was this epic coordination effort using the internet that coordinated hundreds of players in a single swarm to attack the Sleeper at the same time. So it was this massively epic fight that lasted many hours, where the Sleeper just sort of killed the players as they kept coming, and the players sort of pushed the magic system of the game to its limits to resurrect the dying players in the context of the game as quickly as they were being killed, and finally they defeated it. Now in the context of role-playing games, these MMOs, usually when you kill a monster you get treasure. It drops something, that's what it's called. So when the Sleeper died, it dropped a small steel dagger. So that was a bit of a nasty gesture on the part of the game designers. But I think what this story illustrates is that games have the power to motivate people to tackle really extreme challenges. There's a quote I really like from J.G. Chesterton about fiction, where he says that fairy tales do not tell children that dragons exist, but that dragons can be beaten. So I think in the same way, games can teach us that almost any problem can be solved. Now, I mentioned that these three areas are now starting to interact. So science fiction, games, and mathematics. And it's quite natural because all these things now live on the same platform, essentially. So on computers. I think there are some amazing examples of what happens when these three things converge. I mentioned earlier hieroglyphs and people creating things inspired by science fiction. One fantastic hieroglyph comes from again from Neil Stephenson. I don't know if anyone here has read the book The Diamond Age. No? Okay. So The Diamond Age is a great novel by Neil Stephenson, set in the future where a young girl finds a book called Nell, finds a book called A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer. And A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer is essentially a teaching machine. So it's a book that adapts to its reader and tells them stories, but stories that are educational and sort of stories that sort of turn into games. So Nell gets her entire education from A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer that sort of becomes her companion and mentor, and actually she becomes a leader of this revolution. But you have to read the book to get the story. Now, the point I wanted to make was that that researchers at MIT, working on a project called One Laptop Per Child, got really inspired by A Young Lady's Illustrated Primer, and they decided to build it. So they created software called Nell, which is basically interactive educational software that tries to educate by telling stories and sort of small teaching games. And after a few iterations, they put this software on thousands of tablets that were shipped to a village in Ethiopia, and essentially left in the center of the village in the boxes, unopened, without power, and so on. And most of the children in this village were illiterate. 5 months later, I should say the cameras on the tablets had been disabled by sort of an accident of compilation of the kernel of the Android version they were using. 5 months later, when they visited the village, they saw children taking pictures with their tablets. So not only had they figured out how to take pictures with their tablets, because that was supposed to be possible, A lot of them had learned to read. A lot of them had learned to hack the kernel of the Android operating system. So that's sort of a very, very amazing moment of fiction becoming reality and actually far exceeding it. Also, just before I conclude, I have also a brief personal example of how sort of convergence of all these different areas of imagination has affected my life recently. So, a couple of years ago, I was invited to write a short story for the Mozilla Foundation. So the Mozilla Foundation had a conference about the future of the internet, and they wanted to invite science fiction writers to write stories about the threats to the open internet. And I sort of read about an area called trusted computing, where the possibility that in the future, or in some cases now, the ability of a computer to run any given program could be disabled. So it could only run software that the manufacturer allows. And so sort of strong constraints on the universality of computing. Apple kind of, and Google, I guess, to some extent already do that. And I wondered what would happen in a world where this really became ubiquitous and somebody else was deciding what was running around computers. And then I discovered this. So that's a computer built inside Minecraft. So it's essentially a giant castle in Minecraft that is also a computer. So people in Minecraft-like games that allow a lot of freedom to create are, among other things, just for fun, building computers inside. And so this is a vast castle with all kinds of basic elements, torches, switches that you can have in Minecraft that combine into essentially a computer. So I had the idea that what if in this sort of repressive dystopian world where ability to program computers is restricted, hackers would flee into online game spaces and build computers there to run whatever software that they wanted. So I kind of ended up discovering all kinds of really crazy computers, even crazier than this one, that had been built in real life by gamers. My favorite one was the one running Mermaid Blood that you can find in a game called Dwarf Fortress 2, which is kind of worth a talk of its own. But anyway, so I wrote the story, and it was quite well received, and I had on my mind very much this sort of universality of computing, and the fact that you could build computers out of almost anything. And then I attended a program called the Singularity University, and it's sort of like Game Jam, but for 10 weeks, and with the goal of creating ambitious startups instead of games. And I ended up collaborating with some biologists and computer scientists, and we essentially came up with a technology that uses DNA to carry out useful computations. So as a result, it's kind of what's occupying my daily life at the moment. So we founded a company called Helix Nanotechnologies. Unfortunately, I can't tell you in great detail what we're doing. We'll probably announce something sometime late next year. But sort of essentially, it is about making biological molecules to carry out useful computations. So not mermaid blood, but close. Now the reason why I think what we are doing is exciting relates to sort of the conclusion of my talk. So something that is very, very apparent in biology, especially now, is how much more complicated things are than we thought. So just to give you a very brief example, here is a picture of a synapse in the brain. So synapses are the things that sort of allow neurons to fire and to activate, and that sort of happens. All the important stuff happens at that boundary there. And a few years ago, we thought that there were maybe 20 different types of proteins, 20 different types of molecules involved in that reaction. It turns out there are over 2,000. So just like that, and then you multiply that by sort of the billions of neurons that we have in our brain, so trillions. So actually, we vastly underestimated the complexity of our brains. It's almost like us underestimating or overestimating the matter content of the universe, which is dominated by this dark matter that we know very little about. In the same way, we recently realized that actually the sort of 90%, the vast majority of our DNA that we thought is kind of junk, encodes all kinds of complicated control mechanisms that we can't even begin to understand. Then there's the fact that we are now in an era where humanity is completely interconnected, not only to each other, but also to the environment, and we're starting to create all these changes in our climate that we don't understand. Essentially, we are dealing with a world of vastly increased complexity, both at the sort of micro level and the macro level. And the only thing I can compare it to is a moment from about 100 years ago, again, kind of roughly the H.G. Wells era, when we suddenly realized how big a place the universe was. So until the end of 19th century, we thought that Milky Way was pretty much all there was. So all that there was the universe were the stars that we could see in the sky. And then there were these funny blobs that people didn't know what they were. Until roughly 1920, when Edwin Hubble discovered that there were actually other galaxies, and that there were hundreds of billions of them. And here's sort of, and actually, it was a great experience in this quantum game jam to really get a glimpse of the scale of the universe, of actually flying around in this vast galaxy data set that we've gathered. So there was a moment in history when the scale of the known universe expanded by a factor of 10 to the power of 10, which is approximately the difference between a human being and one cell. So the universe is not only much bigger than we thought, but it seems to be also much more complicated than we thought. So I think we need to get serious about imagination. So I started the talk by having this little kernel of reality in the middle of our three intersecting things. But I think that actually reality is much bigger than that. It's much bigger than the scope of our current imagination. So it's a nice quote from J.B.S. Haldane, who said that reality is not only stranger than we imagine, it's stranger than we are capable of imagining. So in order to make progress in science, I think we need to really start expanding the tools of our imagination and pushing those further. And events like the Game Jam, I think, are a fantastic start. And I can't wait to see where we go next. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Hannu. I think there will be for sure many questions. So.
Oh, by the way, I will give special thanks quickly to Sibel Kantola, who drew the.
I said the magic sentence. I'm sure.
Many questions.
Exactly. I know. I mean, yes. Yeah, no.
Yes.
Yes. Sorry. There.
What
I'm
kind
there.
of projects are you going to come up next? Do you have something in mind already? What you are thinking about will be next big step for you, maybe?
Okay, so I guess the two things I am working on are indeed this mysterious Helix Nano project I mentioned, and then I'm also working on my next book. At some point, I would really love to do something with virtual reality, but I haven't quite figured out what that is yet.
Yes.
I was just thinking about the sci-fi and the hieroglyphs and so on. Do you think that sci-fi has actually become more cynical as of late, like last 20 years? Because it used to be like all new inventions and adventures and new planets and kind of hope for the future. And I'm just thinking, is it me or something? But it feels that it's all like dystopias nowadays. So if we are building, like imagining the future we want in there, of course it reflects the current situation.
Yeah.
So is it just me or what's your take?
No, I also think that it's all dystopian.
Yeah. No, I do agree with that, and I think there are some reasons for that. As you say, it does have to do with the sort of changed perception of science and technology, and sort of our distrust in the systems that we've created, which has obvious historical reasons. I think from the point of view of writing fiction, dystopias do make conflicts much easier. So writers do like writing dystopias. But actually, I think this project Hieroglyph, which is sort of a conscious effort initiated by Neil Stephenson and others, is sort of a conscious effort to try to counteract that. So I'm not sure I mentioned it, but they actually had a book that came out recently called, which is called Hieroglyph. It's a collection of short stories that try to create positive, big ideas that could be basis for real life science and technology. So that at least has some optimism in it.
Yes. What do you think for you personally is the most amazing thing, that something that you read or something that someone imagined and that has happened?
That has already that has come to pass. I think reality has kind of exceeded our expectations in many ways, but I think actually H.G. Wells also had an essay called "The World Brain," where this was in 1937, where he imagined sort of an interconnected system of open encyclopedias that anybody could edit.